Today I'd like to talk about complacency and the upcoming 1.1 patch. This may be a bit of a controversial video, but I'll try to keep it short. To start with, I don't really care about the modifiers that come with complacency, because I think the idea of complacency is fundamentally flawed. The idea that once your country reaches a certain size, or once a country reaches a certain size and power, it just gets slapped with a negative modifier that they then have to manage. I would much prefer if EU5 could depict the declining of empires through actual game mechanics instead of just an arbitrary modifier that kicks in at a certain point. I think EU5 does a quite good job of showing how hard it is for empires to retain control of territory through the control mechanic. I know a lot of people don't like control, but I quite like it because it shows how hard it is just to actually gain from a territory. Though, of course, I do have some problems with that. But complacency, does it even make sense for a country to become complacent just because they're strong, or they have no rivals, or there's no coalitions? Complacency sounds and feels like something that should really happen based on the eternal factors within the nation, not just something that happens when the country becomes strong. And really, I disagree with the idea of the modifier entirely. Surely there's ways that we can show how an empire would start to decline, start to decay once it becomes powerful. And that should be able to be done through game mechanics. One of the ideas I've had is pops of different culture. At the moment, it's very easy to pacify pops. You just core their land, and that's it, really. They'll only get a -10 separatism from being the wrong culture core, an integrated core, but that's easy to manage just by increasing their satisfaction. The game currently doesn't really depict the idea of different cultures becoming more rebellious as the ages go by. For example, in the Age of Traditions, pops shouldn't really care that much about being different culture because the ideas of nationalism haven't really come about. But in the final age, the Age of Revolutions, that should really be the point where pops, they care about being part of a state that is of their culture, or at the very least their culture group. To use a nation like Austria-Hungary, for example, which struggled for years, hundreds of years, to try and keep its various cultures in check and in line with the country, and of course failed. So pops of different cultures becoming more hostile to a state that is not of their culture group based on the age you're in could be a good idea to encourage these sort of rebellions or separatist movements that would become quite common towards the end of the game's time span. Another idea is the idea of estates. As it currently stands, if you conquer anywhere, all of the nobles, clerics, and peasants in that land just join your existing estates, and their happiness will increase or decrease to whatever the estate's happiness is. So if you have 100% cleric satisfaction and you conquer a country with new clerics, those clerics will be happy at the same level as your existing clerics, even if they're not of your religion. Does that really make sense? Surely there should be a way to depict these new people being brought in, maybe not exactly being happy just because their estate that they're tied to is happy. An idea I had, which I'm not 100% on, is the idea of every pop that's in an unintegrated territory being part of a new separatist estate, which goal is simply to rebel and break off, and who isn't really happy or angry, but is simply made up of people who don't consider themselves part of the current system. And as you integrate people and territories, those people would then leave the separatist estate and join the existing ones, instead of just joining them the moment they're conquered, as they currently do. But to bring this point about complacency to a close, I just think it's a bad idea that it's kind of missing the point of the game to just slap a modifier on you because you meet some arbitrary criteria, which is what complacency really is. Like, it's just you grow to a certain point and suddenly complacency becomes a problem. And then you have to do these things like being a target of a coalition, having a threatened country as a rival, to stop it increasing, which just feels silly. It feels silly, honestly. But to move on to another point that I've wanted to talk about in relation to the newest patch, but also in relation to the game itself, is the idea of advancements. I was actually not that happy with advancements on release for a few reasons. Specifically, I'm not happy with the idea of advancements that are unique to a specific nation, tag-based advancements. Because again, it feels very arbitrary. If we look at the newest advancement they've showed off for Austria, which decreases the proximity impact when going through mountains, hills, and plateaus, does it really make sense for Austria to be the only one that gets access to that advancement? Should Switzerland not have access to it? Is Switzerland not mountainous enough that they should have access to a decreased cost for proximity through mountains? What about Persia, a nation that is nearly all mountains? Why should Austria be the only one in the game who has access to this unique advancement? Why should anyone have access to unique advancements? Why should France have access to unique advancements but their vassals, the various French counts and dukes, don't have access to them? One of the ways I was thinking of improving this would be to tie advancements to culture, but I think that creates another problem similar to Crusader Kings 3, where the game kind of becomes a culture capturing sim where you just convert to different cultures, grab certain parts of that culture that you like, and create hybrid cultures using the various good parts of cultures you like, which is not really what I want to see for EU5, the idea that you would just switch cultures to get good advancements and then switch to other cultures to get better advancements. That's not an idea I would like. Another thought I had was maybe advancements, unique advancements, cultural ones or tag-based ones, should act a little bit like institutions where they'll be researched by the country initially and then steadily spread out to other nations bordering them. Unlike institutions, this wouldn't be something you could impact the player, it would just be a passive spread. In that way, Austria, for example, could research its of mountains and rivers, and then that would slowly spread into other nations, and they could then gain access to the advancement. To show the idea that, sure, Austria's invented this, they've come up with this, but the idea, of course, has spread. And I feel that way a little bit about the focuses as well, because one of the weird things about focuses is, let's say you get to the Renaissance and you pick the admin focus, you'll never be able to make a march now. Does that make sense? You'll never be able to make a march vassal just because you didn't pick the military focus. You could have all the countries around you making marches, but you'll never know how to. That's why I kind of like this idea of it spreading, because sure, you might not pick to focus on military, you might not have access to marches, but then they could spread and you could become aware of them. And that way your focus would be very much your focus, what you pick to focus on. But it doesn't block you from gaining access to the other advancements that you didn't select. Surely a focus should just be a focus instead of a cut off. Like, we're focusing on admin, and so we don't know anything about diplomacy or military advancements. We only know admin advancements. But honestly, I don't know. I'm sure Paradox doesn't know either. That's why they're kind of rapidly changing the game on the fly, as it were. It's only been 2 months since the game was released, and it already feels like the changes are kind of just being thrown at us kind of rapidly since release. But honestly, I think I've said all I want to say, so I'll simply say thank you for watching. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Do you disagree with me? Do you agree with me? Do you have better ideas? That's what I really want to hear. If I hear a better idea, I will consume it, absorb it, and make it my own. But as I said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.